Welcome to the Check Your Head podcast, where musicians share their mental health stories, experiences, and most importantly, their solutions to their mental health issues. I'm Mari Fong. I'm a music journalist and a life coach for musicians. And in today's episode, we'll be talking with singer-songwriter Kat Jensen, formerly of the band Love Toys, and who's also worked with greats such as Don Henley of the Eagles and the one and only Paul McCartney. So Kat shares her story of depression. And my great co-host today is Tony Gonzalez.
Oh, thank you.
He's the president of the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance here in a local chapter in Los Angeles. And it's also known as DBSA. So welcome to the podcast, Tony, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Mari. It's an honor.
So let's hear Kat Jensen's story. And this all began when she was about 12 years old.
When I first had an inkling that there was something wrong with depression, I was probably in the age group of 11 or 12. But at the time, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it was. This is not something that says, oh, gee, by the way, you're depressed. This is something that, just is a part of everyday life for me. I didn't know. I know I felt different, that I was different. I felt lack of motivation. I didn't feel like myself. Mm-hmm. I wanted to sleep more. I went through a time where I just was watching TV a whole lot, just kind of sitting there and ruminating, just kind of buzzed into the television set. And I ate a lot of root beer floats, I can tell you that. I just kept going back for ice cream and root beer.
That actually sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty magical at the time, because I was trying to fix something, apparently. Mm-hmm. And, video games weren't really big when I was a kid. They were starting to get big, but, I was kind of broke. And so TV and root beer floats worked for me.
Well, they say that when people are depressed, either they lose their appetite or they eat a lot.
Oh, it was a sugar high, definitely.
Okay.
Like 10 root beer floats.
Really?
I mean, I should have owned an A&W franchise.
Okay.
Would have been cheaper.
Well, was there something going on during that time in your life that might have triggered that? Or do you think maybe it was hormonal changes? That is kind of like the age of puberty. And, a lot of young adults, when they go through that change, they start to have some mental health issues.
Right. I'm no doubt there was probably changes. Teenagers have a tough time. Mm-hmm. It's tough enough to be a teenager and go through that hormonal change. But mine was so distinctive because I really isolated. Mm-hmm. And, and just going for root beer floats and watching TV all day is not really probably extremely healthy because of the isolation. And I think that these are big cues, mm-hmm. Isolation, feeling different, not knowing what's wrong, lack of motivation, mm-hmm. All of these kinds of things. And the things that, as you asked, may have been going on. I have a family history. My mother was schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. She had previously been a drug addict. I'd been a foster child. I'd gone through a lot by the time I was the age of 12. I was probably like a 50-year-old in a 12-year-old body.
So with your mom having her mental health challenges with schizophrenia, do you feel like you almost had to parent yourself? Did you feel like you were alone in that
absolutely.
sense? Or was your father able to kind of step in and do anything to help you out?
What's kind of amazing is that families often have a dynamic, and part of that dynamic can be a lot of denial. Mm-hmm. Because when it's something that you don't understand, you just don't open a can of worms, And oddly enough, my father was a physician but yet he couldn't treat his own family. He worked 3 jobs. He worked to help children with cancer. He had his own practice, and he had patients in the hospital, and that took, a majority of his time. And I don't fault him for that. He was giving of himself to other people in the world. But I'll tell you, families often don't see what's right in front of them until it becomes so unmanageable. Mm-hmm. And this is, finally my mother did become very unmanageable, and that led to, hospitalizations, and ultimately to finally in her later years, she got, the help that she needed and lived out the rest of her life fairly sane. But that doesn't happen for everyone. And there's a lot that leads up to that. So families do deal with mental illness, and it's not an easy thing to talk about. And for me, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I, here I am, 12 years old, and, I don't know what's going on around me.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like your mom might have taken out her frustrations on the family, or, as far as your upbringing, was that part of a traumatic experience that affected you later on with your depression?
When you deal with a family that has mental illness, first thing you have to really grasp is that the behavior's not typical. This is behavior that, my mother actually thought that God was speaking to her through the television set, and she's sending money to online preachers and doing things that most people would say that's just insanity. You need to stop her. But when it's happening around you, you don't realize it because you're just too close. Mm-hmm. It's like being too close. And my mother also, ran the roost, so to speak, in a lot of ways. So, a lot of times you didn't really cross-examine. You didn't ask. You just went out through your life and kind of put blinders on. And I did. I put blinders on. I kept myself watching TV. I kept, it's just like kids that do a lot of video games. It's the same idea. You just kind of check out. You just aren't there anymore. So that led me down the path to feel that I wasn't worth anything, and that I didn't really need to be here. And I would play guitar. I would try to wrap myself within everything that was about music because it took me away somewhere else.
So you were able to kind of escape with music and maybe be distracted by what's going on around you. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of musicians also, when they have so much going on in their head, whether it's depression or whether it's excitement, they're able to express that through their music. Did you find that to be something that you could
definitely. A lot of musicians do escape that way. They go through and write, or, and I do believe that it was the beginning of my writing career. I did start to write because it was an expression outside of myself, because no one could know what I was feeling inside. I wasn't like everyone else. Wasn't the jocks. I wasn't the prom girls or I wasn't popular. I just would write lyrics, play things on the guitar that made me feel, and that's the way that I could cope. Mm-hmm. And I believe that a lot of musicians do cope that way because it's another reality. It takes you to another level, and it makes you feel as if nothing else can touch you. You're untouchable at that point.
Now, at the time, at 12 years old, in your early teens, were you able to talk to anybody about it and let someone else know about what's going on with you?
Not really. Not for me. I didn't get into therapy until I was much older, till I was in my 20s. But, earlier on, basically, as I found other people had the same kind of feelings as I did. It's like I didn't fit in with a lot of the high school kids that I knew. that were, as I said, jocks or something like that. But boy, when I got in with other musicians, it was almost like we knew each other really well. We knew each other's souls. You could just pick up an instrument, or guitar, whatever, and just start jamming. And it's like we knew each other. And that's why I do believe that we have a commonality. There's a common way of the way our brains think, the way we're wired. We're kind of hardwired.
Well, they do say that musicians, creative people have a much higher incidence of mental illness, depression being one of them. And, some music was something that made you feel better. Were there any other things that you did to kind of self-medicate yourself?
Listen, it was a time of, talk about medicating or whatever. It was a time of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby. It's like you got with other like-minded people, and you didn't really have to think. We kind of all had the same thing. We want to get up and rock. We want to get up and play. We want to get out there and enjoy and, and forget about all that crazy stuff that's around. They're the ones that are crazy, not us. Mm-hmm. We're living it. We're having a great time. And I believe that that's the reality that we all have in common.
Mm-hmm. So it was a sense of camaraderie, a sense of comfort, a sense of escape. But at the same time, you were expressing your feelings through music. And you eventually started a band called Love Toys in the 90s. And
Dig that name, right?
I love the name. Yes.
Do you know that we weren't able to play? We were told that they wanted us to play some sort of a Catholic fiesta or some kind of thing like that, and they booked us, and then by the time we got out there to play, they said, "Oh no, you got to change your name. You can't come out here and play with that name."
Well, I think it's the coolest name ever. And
but the idea was that we are all kids at heart, and adults have toys. They got jet skis, they've got boats, they've got everything else. We love our toys. I love my guitars, It wasn't about naughty stuff. It was about loving all the things in life and being a kid at heart.
Right. Now, you said that you went out on tour.
Yes.
And, played music festivals, Crew Fest,
yes.
Which was inspired by Motley Crue. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, that lifestyle of being on tour, how did that affect your mental health?
I would say, at first with anything that happens, it's exciting. I did that. I also toured the UK a little bit. And, it's all exciting at first, but eventually these things that are deep inside are still there. And now you've got the accessibility of everything to try and numb yourself. You've got, as I said before, sex, drugs, rock and roll. You've got all of that to numb yourself. And eventually the stress related to it, the constantly having to be on, even when you're having a shitty day or whatever it is, you have to still perform. They expect you to be, on all the time. And that eventually gets to a person. I mean, I don't care who it is. And you'll see the more that is piled upon a person with all the responsibility. First it's all fun and games. You're just rocking out. Next thing you know, it's a job. And it's like any other job. You're working really hard. You now are branding yourself, and you're working as hard as any other CEO to make this thing happen. And you've got a lot on your head. And, you have to perform through all that. And some of us just, quite frankly, are, we didn't set out really for that. It was just, it's great. We all dream of stardom, or we dream to tour or to do the things that we want to do. But there's also a lot of responsibility goes with that. And maybe we're not always prepared. And it's not quite what we may have thought. You romance a lot of things in your mind.
Well, that's the other thing, is that the reality of being on tour is being on a tour bus with a bunch of other people, and late nights and everybody wanting to party and maybe handing you a drink and handing you other things because of that whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I could see where that could be a real, not a good situation.
That's the thing about it is that I think what they used to say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? It's like, you have all these fantastic intentions of, I'm going to rock, I'm going to have a great time with everybody. And, but then, next thing you know, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock comes along. You got to hit a plane at 6. You have to be fresh. And even a person in the most, fantastic of physical shape in your early 20s is going to get tired. Eventually, your body is finally going to tell you, hey, wait a minute, you're doing a little too much and you need to knock it off. And we don't listen half the time because I'm not going to lie to you, it's a fantastic ride. It's a great ride to do this job. But there's also the responsibility to yourself. And you got to police your own health. You have to really look out for yourself.
Well, can you think of a time where things got really bad with your depression to the point where you felt like you were at your lowest point?
Yeah, depression has a way of lying to you. I know that it can take a person to their lowest point. Sometimes it's sneaky. I started off by kind of carving my arms. I'd have letters on my arms. I'd carve my name in my arms. That was so that I could actually feel what it was inside of me, I could see when the blood ran that it was real. And I know that sounds difficult to understand, but sometimes you're in such a surreal world in your own mind, and how your mind gets so hijacked, the reality is hard to decipher. So I had to look at my own arm to remind myself of the real pain that was there and that I needed help. And it went on to the point to where, I'll be candid. And this is very hard for me to admit because there is a lot of stigma around it. But I wound up in the hospital because I tried to kill myself. And that takes, a lot for a person to get to that point. And all I can say is that God help you if you're in that point. And I want you to reach out and talk to someone because I don't wish that on anyone. I don't want anyone to suffer the way that I did. And, so suicide was what I thought was an option. And
well, thank you for letting us know about that because I know there are a lot of other musicians and people in general that get to that point. And it's important to know how you get to that point.
Mine was kind of genetic. I had a genetic predisposition for it. I had some things that would probably cause some post-traumatic stress, that had happened in my life. These are triggers. These are things that now I know exist. But, the important thing is to realize is that we can start to feel ourselves and start taking our own temperature and realize that we are worth it to try to police our own health.